Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Planning Commission. My name is Jenny V. Jolson. Thank you for joining us this evening. Let's begin with roll call.
Acosta? Hammer? Here. Rodriguez?
Here.
Sarmiento?
Here.
Tavares? Jones?
Here.
Beach Olson?
Here. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States for which it stands. Now, presentation and oral communications. This is the time set aside in our meeting for members of the general public to address the Planning Commission on any item that is not on the agenda, which is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Planning Commission. No action or discussion shall be taken on any item presented, except that any commissioner may respond to statements made or questions asked, or may ask clarifying questions. All matters of an administrative nature will be referred to staff. All matters relating to Planning Commission will be noted in the minutes and may be scheduled for future meetings. Any commissioner may place matters brought up under oral communications on a future agenda. All speakers are asked to fill out a card and leave it at the podium, announce their name and address in order to obtain an accurate record for the minutes. Are there any oral communications from the public? Yes, please come on down to the podium. Be sure to state your name and address clearly.
Hi, Drew Rogers, Watsonville. That's good enough address, I guess. So anyway, so very quickie, I was wondering if they're going to have more bike parking at the main plaza, if that's been addressed. And if not, I'd be happy to give some for free. I have some that I'd be happy to actually donate to the city.
Okay.
We need more.
Thank you for your comment, and it'll be reported in the minutes, and it can be addressed in the future. And we have your contact information because I believe you've emailed us as well. Correct? Yes. All right, thank you. Any other comments? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the reports to the Planning Commission. This is an overview of the hotel project at 1 Western Drive. I believe we'll start with the project history and status.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners, members of the public. I'm Justin Meek, Principal Planner for the City of Watsonville. I've been asked to provide some background information on the approved project at 1 Western Drive. So here is a timeline just so you understand the entitlement process that has happened to date. In 2015, there was an application to construct a 4-story hotel. It was submitted on February 24th. At the time, the average height of the building was around 44 feet, with some tower elements that reached 70 feet. Their overall square footage for the proposed project was roughly 75,000 square feet. It involved 84 parking spaces. To accommodate them, there were mechanical lifts proposed at the time. It went before Planning Commission for the first time on April 17th in 2015. There were a number of questions that were asked by Planning Commissioners, and there was a follow-up public meeting with by the developer at Notre Dame on the 22nd of the same month. In 2016, it went before the Planning Commission for a second time on March 1st. And that resulted in a recommendation for approval. The tower elements of the project at the time were the same. It reached up to 70 feet. The project square footage, however, was less. The floor area now was about 53,000 square feet and involved 82 parking spaces, also still with mechanical lifts. They went before City Council on the 22nd of the same month, at which time it was approved. In 2017, there was a first submittal for a building permit in September 28th of 2017. There was also a minor modification requested in December of the same year. so as to allow for the change of the hotelier from a La Quinta to a Home 2 Suites. On January 10th of 2018, the zoning administrator approved the minor modification. Some of the key elements of the design of the project at that time is the tower height was reduced to 64 feet from 70. The overall square footage was roughly the same at 56,000 square feet. Additional rooms were added, and parking was also increased to 85. At this point, there was no proposed mechanical lifts, however. In 2019, the building permit plans were approved as of March 21st. Obviously, those need to be acted on to be able to remain active. The building official did extend the permit on, let's see, September 6th, within that 6-month period, which provides it to be still active for at least the building permit applications to be active, allowing the applicant the opportunity to pull the permit for constructing the hotel by March of next year. And that provides the general outline of the project and our oral presentation.
I'd like to open it up to the public for any comments on this agenda or this report. Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the Planning Commission for clarifying questions.
So I have a couple. In the original plan, first of all, I want to thank staff for all the extra effort that went into answering some of the questions that were brought up by the public back in November. This was a lot of information to go through, and I appreciate being able to get it and being able to review it. And what I came across in particular, and I think what caused some of the confusion, was specifically language used in the second memorandum versus the first. Specifically, language relating to parking. It says the current proposal provides 85 parking spaces through a partial underground 2-level parking garage. And I think that's what created major confusion within some of the neighbors because that language wasn't used in the first memorandum that was approved. So I wanted to bring that up. And then the other question was around what was used to determine whether it was a major or a minor modification. In reviewing the change memorandum, specifically it was listed that less than 25% of the total square footage was impacted, and therefore, because it was below the 25%, it could be approved as a minor change. And I just wanted to go on the public record as getting those two particular questions that were answered. Those two particular questions fell under the purview of the Planning Commission, and I felt it important to come back to the public and be able to address those two major issues and questions that they had.
Any other comments or questions from commissioners? Okay. I'll just state that I appreciate that the neighbors did come out to our meeting last month and that I value their input and the questions that they had regarding their community. And clearly your persistent attention to this matter indicates to me how much you care for our community here in Watsonville. So seeing no further questions or comments at this time, thank you for your report. We appreciate it. Moving on to the consent agenda. All items appearing on the consent agenda are recommended actions, which are considered to be routine and will be acted upon as one consensus motion. Any items removed will be considered immediately after the consensus motion. The chair will allow public input prior to the approval of the consent agenda. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for the November 5th meeting.
I'll second it.
Let's call for a vote.
Yes.
Rodriguez?
Yes.
Sarmiento?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Beach, Olson.
Yes.
Motion passed.
And moving along to our public hearing. This is an application for a special use permit with design review and environmental review to allow the construction of 3 one-story commercial buildings totaling 20,000 plus square feet and including 2 drive-through facilities located at 975 to 1075 Main Street. Filed by Rod Furman with Booz Development Group, applicant on behalf of 975 Main Street Associates LLC, property owner. We will begin with a staff report this evening.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners, Chair, and members of the public. I'm Justin Meek, Principal Planner for the City of Watsonville, and I'll be providing the staff report for tonight on this project. Just as a way of an overview, I'll touch on the location of the project, the key elements of the proposed design, a detailed discussion on a range of topics relating to zoning, to consistency with certain standards, touch on CEQA, and then speak to the certain conditions of approval and required findings in adopting a resolution approving the project as well as adopting the MND for this specific project. The proposed location is off Main Street at 975 through 1075 Main Street on 2 adjoining properties. On the south and sides of the property, it adjoins Watsonville Slough, which is publicly owned land and designated environmental management. The site itself has been used historically since the 40s for various types of commercial activities, including market and auto service, and has since, the buildings have since been demolished after they were vacated. The site is majorly designated for general commercial in the general plan land use map, and is within the Thoroughfare Commercial Zoning District. The requested entitlements include a special use permit to allow for the establishment of drive-through facilities as part of this proposed project, as well as design review and environmental review per CEQA. The project involves the construction of 3 new buildings that would replace the former 3 buildings in essence, 2 drive-throughs at either end of the project site, outside seating framing all 3 buildings in 1 to 2 locations per building, as well as new bicycle racks at 3 locations, new landscaping throughout the entire site, including street trees along Main Street, and 3 new trash enclosures as well. Just showing This is just showing a zoomed-in view of the proposed site plan, showing the layout of the new buildings, the on-site circulation, location of the parking towards the rear of the site, and buildings towards the front, although the internal, with some outside seating, framing the buildings and facing towards the street itself. And I'll go into greater detail about certain aspects of it as I proceed. It shows a composite elevation provided from a plan view and street level view, just to get a sense of what it would look like from Main Street itself. And of course, pretty pictures, landscaping plan showing the location of the proposed landscaping. You can see 17 new street trees within Caltrans right-of-way in front of the buildings, along with more ornamental trees throughout the parking lot and shade trees in the parking spaces itself, and a few California native live oak trees also towards the margins and near the riparian areas. Now, the existing site is about 3 acres in size. It's currently vacant, but formerly was used by a variety of commercial activities, as I mentioned before, since the late 40s. Most recently, various forms of auto service, although no longer a auto filling station, restaurant, and market. One of which, one of the auto services, back in, I think it was December of last year, got a use permit to relocate to a different location downtown. Surrounding the site, as I mentioned previously, includes Watsonville Slough and Ramsey Park on either side. Across the street is other forms of commercial development, most notably grocery outlet, but there's also some lodging and restaurants and other forms of commercial businesses. The procedure for tonight is the consideration of two discretionary permits. One is a special use permit, and the other is design review. And of course, this is a project subject to CEQA, so an initial study has been prepared that informed the preparation of an MND for your consideration as well. In terms of the detailed discussion and analysis I'll provide, I'll go into these range of topics from compatible use to flood prevention. The proposed uses, which include fast casual restaurants and retail shops, complement existing commercial development up and down Main Street, which is predominantly commercial. I provide a convenient location in that it's along a major thoroughfare where patrons can readily access it. The proposed buildings are of a modern design and have a nice complement to some of the existing development, most notably grocery outlet across the street. It abuts existing utilities, and so would not need an extension of or increasing the existing utilities that currently serve that area. It also maintains a 30-foot buffer from riparian habitat, and no development is beyond the upper portion of the site down into the slough environment, which is designated as environmental management for protection. The proposed project is consistent with the zoning district's regulations concerning building height and setbacks. The building setbacks is only 15 feet from the front to the property line, and it maintains greater than a 50-foot setback. And the building height, even with the tower elements, are consistent with the maximum building height of up to 35 feet. As you are aware, there's also a drive-through ordinance that the city adopted years ago. It meets the location and design standards of that ordinance. There are, as you know, two drive-through facilities, one of which is within 200 feet of an intersection, Auto Center Drive and Main, and the other one is beyond 200 feet at about 260 feet away. And in addition to that, the other design standards, including making sure that the lane widths are 14 feet on curves and 11 feet on straight sections, conform to all these requirements. None of the drive-through lanes exit out into the public street, but within the internal circulation. Stacking is at least 4 cars. I think it's 4, 5, and 6 in the two locations. And there's landscaping that will be provided that would help screen the drive-through facilities from public view. It also conforms with other city standards, including parking. The site plan shows that 143 parking spaces are provided, and as shown here, with a makeup of essentially 9 restaurants and 3 retail shops, it provides more than the minimum requirement that the city has based on those types of uses. There are 3 locations where bike racks are provided, each next to buildings 1, 2, and 3. In terms of their location, 2 of them are next to seating areas, next to buildings 2 and 3, and the third, next to building 1, is in line with the ramp leading from the on-site circulation. The architectural design is of a modern building. All sides are well composed, articulated, and consistent with one another. They include varied wall planes with pop-out features, different colors and materials. They have varied roof planes, which are achieved through not different roof heights, but parapet walls that give the appearance of different roof heights in addition to tower elements. As I mentioned before, all 4 sides have the same level of architectural treatments. And even the side shown here facing Main Street, which is technically the back of house, except for around the sides where there's some outside seating and some windows, there are no entries off of Main Street, and so they provided awnings and even landscape panels to help soften the appearance and increase its visual appeal from the public right-of-way. The building materials are primarily stucco. Again, they have recessed walls, some of which are accented with fiber cement boards, which provides a lap siding appearance. And all the buildings also have a tile base of 2 different materials, which are further shown on the color palette and materials, as shown here. The site is currently accessible from 2 driveways off of Main Street, which is a Caltrans facilities. There are some minor changes to the signal phasing and lane striping proposed, including providing a protected left turn out of the site onto Main Street and restriping it to accommodate that left turn. Any and all improvements would have to go to Caltrans for their review and approval as part of the next stage if they get entitlements to get a building permit. Just want to take a moment to note that in the initial study prepared for the document, it also identified that with project construction and implementation, there would be some operational impacts to the existing operations of Main Street, particularly at Lonely Parkway in Green Valley. And so some of the recommendations, again, to Caltrans is to adjust the signal phasing along Main Street to help make sure that the operations or congestion along Main Street doesn't increase, but is smoothed out. Pedestrian access is also currently provided from the existing multi-use trail that fronts the site. There's some additional enhancements that are proposed, and that would include providing colored concrete paths that tie in to the circulation network on site, and that would be the same materials used to replace the existing asphalt 8-foot wide path with a 8-foot wide concrete path and gravel, 1-foot gravel on either side, which is consistent with the city's pedestrian bike master plan standards for a greenway trail. In terms of bike access, there's both a existing Class 2 bike lane within the roadway itself, as well as people are allowed to use the multi-use path, both for pedestrian and bicycle access. Again, that would be enhanced. And this is a view showing what that looks like today. As I mentioned previously, there's new landscaping that would be proposed. It would involve first replacing or removing and then replacing the landscaping. Some key highlights include 61 total new trees, 17 of which would be street trees along the frontage of the project site in Caltrans right-of-way. These are the same street trees that were the same street tree planting species as has recently been planted by the city near Ramsey Park. It's a Hungarian oak type tree. That's one of the names for it. It has a few different names. There's also 7 new live oak trees that will be proposed, and then 37 ornamental trees. And these are, as briefly highlighted before, these are the street trees, the oak trees in these locations, larger shade trees in the parking lot, and then more ornamental trees such as crepe myrtle and Chinese elm and frontier elm to provide a little bit more color and interest. There's also a plant palette that includes a range of shrubs and ground covers, as well as particular materials that are designed to thrive, or at least be able to survive inundation when you have stormwater directed into them in the bioswales. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the drainage section coming up. You notice the little orange arrow pointing at butterfly weed. That was identified by Wetlands Watch as a potential invasive species. So staff has included a condition of approval requiring that specific species be replaced with one of the 5 recommended species listed here. In terms of the riparian buffer zone, the project maintains a 30-foot buffer. There are some areas where there's existing development that is closer to the riparian zone, and those areas are allowed to be redeveloped as part of this project. Any new development maintains at least a 30-foot buffer and as part of this proposed project. In terms of proposed lighting, there's both wall-mounted decorative lighting on the buildings themselves, and of course pole-mounted lighting fixtures within the parking lot itself. I'm going to touch on the pole-mounted lighting. As shown here, this is a photometric plan. Don't try to look at the numbers, but just shows you the projected amount of light that would fall onto the ground. These are in foot candles. It shows a fairly even distribution across it of an adequate amount of light, on average about 3-foot candles, which is appropriate for a parking lot setting. One thing I would note is the distribution pattern assumes an even distribution in all directions, as shown in that little graphic in the lower right corner. And so because this was identified as a potential nuisance to wildlife habitat, one of the conditions of approval that's been added in concert with mitigation measure Bio 2 is to revise the photometric plan such that around the edges and perimeter of the site, the direction of the light would be directed onto the site and not in all directions, so as to not potentially create a glare nuisance to wildlife, particularly nesting birds or other species that could be affected by the lighting. There are 3 trash enclosures that are proposed as part of this project. They include design elements that draw from the building so that it has a consistent look and feel. They also meet city standards, including a drain as well as a cover. And of course, they would be softened by landscaping as shown in the screen capture in the upper right-hand corner. That mitigation measure I previously referenced, BIO2, also identified the potential for the trash enclosure to become an attractive nuisance to pests, and so condition of approval in 53 has been provided as part of your design review and use permit conditions of approval to ensure that subsequent future tenants would regularly monitor and clean and secure the trash enclosures at night so that they would not become attractive to various kinds of pests such as raccoon, opossum, and Norway rats. You'll note that on the elevations, some conceptual signage is provided. These are just in conceptual in nature at this point, just to give you an idea of where signs would go. There's, of course, a condition of approval for the applicant to submit a sign permit application, and staff will review it for conformance with existing regulations, including the aggregate area that's allowed based on the square footage or frontage of the proposed buildings. In terms of drainage, there's a more detailed discussion in the staff report. A brief highlight is as follows, that the overall site has been designed to drain into 3 areas, all of which would involve having a bioretention basin that will allow for the treatment of stormwater. There's design also to allow for infiltration under typical storm events. When there is a large storm event, kind of like what we've had recently, it provides peak control that directs it through a series of pipes that channel through the various bioretention bases and has an ultimate private outfall in the southeastern side of the project site into the slough. And this is just a cross-section showing what a bioretention basin looks like. In terms of flood hazard, being next to the slough, it is also prone to flooding. The southern portion of the site is within the 100-year floodplain with a base flood elevation of approximately 26 feet. And so because of that, the finished floor elevations of each building is higher than that base elevation by more than a foot. As shown here, the little graphic indicates FF for finished floor, all of which are the least is 28 feet, and it goes up to 29 feet approximately. Again, based off of the flood elevation of 26 feet, it provides more than a 1 foot freeboard, which is the minimum requirement. In terms of environmental review, we have a representative of Placeworks who thankfully made the long drive in this lovely weather and made it just in time, so I appreciate that. Initial study was prepared on behalf of the city, representing our independent review. Based off of that analysis and the comments received, a mitigated negative declaration has been prepared. That's the first action that the commission would take in considering this project. It includes all the required findings as well as adopting a formal mitigation, monitoring, and reporting program as part of this project to ensure that all mitigation measures are implemented with construction and operation of it. Following my presentation, I will invite our consultant to provide a brief presentation on the CEQA components for your own understanding and to answer any questions you may have. As I mentioned previously, there are required findings as part of this action that needs to be taken. This is not a legislative decision being made, but a quasi-judicial decision, and so with any quasi-judicial decision, findings must be made. Findings have been drafted in support of the project for allowing the drive-through facilities and design review permit as well. And so staff at this point recommends that the Planning Commission adopt separate resolutions. First, considering the mitigated negative declaration, and second, approving the special use permit with design review to allow the construction of 3 one-story commercial buildings totaling 20,000 square feet, and including 2 drive-through facilities on the 3-acre site located at 975 through 1075 Main Street on the two subject properties. With that, I'd like to open up a separate presentation for the consultant to provide. All right.
Good evening. My name is Steve Nowak. I'm the principal in charge for this environmental study, and I work for PlaceWorks. We're located in Berkeley. And I'm just going to do a quick overview of the what the California Environmental Quality Act entails, what is an initial study mitigated negative declaration, just talk a little bit about the project impacts and mitigation measures, as well as summarize the comments that we've received on the project. So CEQA is the California Environmental Quality Act, and it's the state's primary environmental protection law. It requires public agencies to analyze and disclose environmental impacts of project, any project that may have a physical effect on the environment. And the city has completed the CEQA review for this project by preparing an initial study mitigated negative declaration. What that means is that in this case, any identified impacts were mitigated either through site changes, design changes, or the implementation of mitigation measures. So the project would not result in any significant environmental impacts. If you have projects that look like they're going to result in significant impacts, then you use the EIR as the vehicle to address the project. And an initial study is really just a checklist, and it's the Appendix G checklist of the CEQA guidelines. And all phases of the project are considered in the initial study. It includes 21 different topic areas, so it's a pretty exhaustive list of potential environmental issues that could arise. And again, in this case, because the identified impacts, we were able to mitigate them through implementation of mitigation measures, we're able to use the negative declaration instead of an EIR. And it's an mitigated negative declaration it's an informational document. It's disclosing what the impacts are, and it's also disclosing what mitigations would be necessary to reduce those to less than significant levels. And in terms of implementation, part of your packet includes a mitigation monitoring and reporting plan, which identifies the mitigation measure itself, the parties who are responsible for implementing, and in certain cases, the need to go back and verify that the mitigation was accomplished as part of the project. And a mitigated negative declaration must be approved by the city as part of the project approval process, and preferably prior to project approval. But again, it does not indicate approval of the project. It's really just noting what the impacts are and the fact that with mitigation measures, the impacts could be brought to a less than significant level. As I mentioned, we studied all of the potential impacts, full range, ranging from more urban type impacts, including aesthetics and air quality. We looked at biological resources, cultural resources, pretty much the whole gamut of the types of impacts that could occur. We had a separate transportation study that was done, and we had biologists come out and supplement the work that was provided by the applicant in doing the biological resource study. That's probably one of the biggest issues that we looked at. Then we looked at the delivery of the impacts on public services and other utilities and service systems, et cetera. So it was a comprehensive review, and as a result, we found potential impacts in the areas of biological resources, cultural resources, and that's really more of a standard in terms of looking at the potential for any archaeological finds during the excavation and construction process, and that those mitigation measures address what would be done in the event of finding archaeological resources. We also included impacts or mitigation measures for geology and soil, transportation, as well as tribal cultural resources. We received, the initial study was published on October 8th, and went through a 30-day public comment period, received comments from 5 agencies, organizations, and individuals. The comments included suggested changes to the projects, concerns over the impacts to the Watsonville Slough, and data requests and comments on traffic from Caltrans. We provided a response to comments document, which is in your packet as well. And that concludes my presentation.
Just like to note that the applicant and their representatives is here tonight, and I think one of their individuals would like to make a brief statement before the planning commission.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, members of the Commission. My name is Robert Karn from RAK Engineers in Fairfield, California. We're happy to be here tonight presenting our project. Our presentation is actually quite simple. Your staff has been super. PlaceWorks has been fantastic. We've reviewed all their documents. We agree with everything they're asking us to do. And we're proud to have our project in front of you, and we're just here to answer any questions you may have and ask for your support. Thank you.
At this time, I'll open it up to the Planning Commission to ask clarifying and technical questions.
So I have a couple. This may be more appropriate for the PlaceWorks representative. In the large book we received from you, section page 4-7. Talk about it. There's a paragraph in here about existing conditions, and I thought it was an interesting point that you brought up that said the previous land use generates approximately 3,200 weekday average daily trips and 4,400 average daily trips on the weekend. That comes out to about 24,000, I think if my math is right, weekly trips. So my question is, I didn't see that same sort of number study done for the proposed development. Will there be an increase in the number of daily trips at that particular intersection? Okay.
I don't know the answer offhand, but I know that the trip generation of the buildings were considered as part of the project to look at what the weekday trips would be and trips on the weekend, and that was factored into the analysis itself.
Okay. Because the only place I saw something like that was under the carbon monoxide section on page 4-14.
Air quality review.
Correct.
Yeah, the transportation section, let me just get to that, would have addressed that. So the transportation section is based off of a traffic impact analysis that was prepared for the project, and it is included in your appendix, and within that you would find the numbers for that would have the daily trips and the weekend trips that would be generated by this type of use.
Okay. Do you know where that is in this section? Because I went through it, but I couldn't find it.
Okay, I will need to find a copy of the appendix, and if you give me 1 sec, I can.
Sure, yeah, no problem. And then probably more appropriate to the developer that was just up here. Was housing ever considered a part of this project? Watsonville has a significant housing crisis.
This project is zoned CT commercial. I do recognize that some housing is involved in the CT commercial zoning, but the housing that's involved is transient housing, which would be hotel-type projects. Our early discussions with city staff, we felt and staff felt that we were going the right direction with a 100% commercial project. In terms of residential housing, the current general plan and zoning, and staff can jump in on this, does not allow us to do zoning or allow us to do residential within our current zoning, nor do we wish to, quite frankly.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Is that correct about the the housing that we're not, the zoning not allow it for residential?
In the thoroughfare commercial zoning district, it is mainly principally permitted for commercial uses. And it is, if you think about most of Main Street, it is, aside from the downtown, it is commercial uses on a main thoroughfare. Multi-family residential uses are allowable in that zoning district with a special use permit. It's not a principally permitted use. But along this portion of the thoroughfare, that is not an ideal use. In the downtown, we are looking at mixed use and with a downtown specific plan allowing increased density both for commercial uses on the first floor as well as upper floors, but also allowing more density with multifamily housing. And so we are looking at increasing density and increasing opportunities for more housing in the areas that have historically been zoned and looked at for housing. But putting housing on Main Street with
Right, but mixed
Yeah.
use,
mixed use.
as the Hanson project?
Yeah, that is a different zoning district. So in the downtown, that is allowable as a principally permitted use, having mixed use. In the thoroughfare commercial zoning district, it is not.
So what about the town, the apartments that are right there? Is it Rodriguez and Main?
Yeah, that's Rodriguez.
Hold on, I'm trying to think. Rodriguez in Maine? You mean Rodriguez?
They're on Rodriguez,
Yeah, they're on Rodriguez, not on Main.
Well,
The tennis court.
the tennis
well,
court.
part of it is on
Correct.
Main Street,
Yeah, the addresses may not be, but the buildings themselves.
are part of it.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that, I mean, I didn't realize how big the lot was, but it would have been a great opportunity to have mixed use, very similar to the Hanson project.
Yeah, the way that zoning works and planning works is we create the zoning district, we create the regulations. If an applicant comes in and their project meets those regulations and meets all the standards that we'd set forth, there's not a lot we can do. The market, in large part, drives what developers and property owners are going to propose to build on their property. And this applicant has chosen not to look at mixed use for this. It's been a site that has been solely commercial since it was originally developed, and that's what they're proposing tonight.
I have another question also. I thought a few months back we talked about drive-through facilities, and I know that we didn't pick it up again, but it was clearly something that I thought that we would start looking at, that not building drive-through facilities, and especially when we have one Starbucks will be developed on Green Valley and Main Street, which is a drive-through, and then proposing to have two other drive-throughs, what is it, a mile away, maybe less than a mile. Other cities are moving forward in putting a cap on drive-throughs, and I was really hoping that we would do something similar.
That was not, I know we've gone back and forth, different projects that have come forward with drive-throughs and discussed it, but it's not something that council has directed staff to do. I know that is definitely a concern of residents and the planning commission as well as council members, but that was not on our planning list for this last year. It's something that we can definitely look at in the future.
Anyway, that the developers would reconsider not having drive-throughs. I mean,
Our project doesn't function well without the drive-throughs. The tenants require drive-throughs. We're in accordance with the general plan and the zoning guidelines. I understand where you're coming from, but at this point, our project needs the drive-throughs in order to function, and we are in accordance with your zoning and your general plan, and we are. Sorry.
That's a shame.
Go for it.
Thank you. I have several questions, probably for staff, but possibly for the applicant. The first question is the EMOS designation on the property. That's on the eastern side, and it's just that small strip. Is that correct? I'm looking at this. It's
Oops, here,
figure.
let's
sorry.
try that again.
It's figure 3-4 in our initial study book. Because I don't think you have it in the slideshow.
I have a slide here
Okay,
to
yeah.
illustrate the site. So the project site is as follows.
And so it's just that
And it's the
eastern.
portion where it slopes down from the flat portion of the
Okay.
commercial site down towards the Watsonville Slough itself.
Okay. And so the thought is that by developing this, and I'm not sure if this would be for the applicant, but by developing this property, currently on that map, the property, the EMOS to the right is, shall we say, home to people. And people are living in there, and it is not an area for living. So the thought, what I read in the packet was that the thought was that would be less desirable if this development went with the development of that property. That's what I read. Is that correct?
Do you rephrase that in terms of less developable or less desirable?
That by developing the property,
Mhm.
that the proposed development, that it would be less desirable for people to be living in those areas, the EMOS areas.
That is one of the potential benefits of the project, is with more activity, more eyes in the general environment, people that are currently down in the riparian zone in Watsonville Slough may choose to go to a place where they're less likely to be observed. And so so in essence, these homeless encampments may in fact close in proximity to the project site.
Okay, and I know that's been an ongoing expense for the city in that way. Let's see, can you show me where the pedestrian entrances are to the project?
Here's a screen capture of the side of the project site next to Main Street. And so the pedestrian entrances would be from the existing trail, which again would be changed or replaced from asphalt to a concrete surface, and then including making enhancements across the driveway approaches and driveway and intersection approach here as well. That same concrete would then tie into the circulation network of the site itself.
Okay, so would pedestrians enter that driveway? Is that where they would enter, or is there a path to get into?
There's a path right here.
Oh, here, okay.
There's a path right there.
Okay, and then there's
another
one there.
right here.
Okay, so there are specific pedestrian entrances.
Yes.
Okay, and then do you have a slide where you can show what the pedestrian circulation access would be inside the project?
Let me bring up the overall site plan. So the pedestrian circulation, if you're coming from Main Street from the sort of northwest and coming down across, you enter into the site, you come through this side, you have pedestrian paths in front of the buildings, you have a crossing over here to this building as well, and then another crossing right here to this building. This is all raised concrete. There's a curb that would separate vehicles from pedestrian in all these locations. Obviously, some of this area is intended for outside seating, but these would be the pedestrian areas in front of the buildings and the crossings between buildings 1 and 2 and 2 and 3.
Okay, so then bicycle access would be through the entrance, the two driveways.
Yes.
And so I'm noticing on the building number 1 that so let's go to building 2 and building 3. The bike racks are located in areas where there is outdoor seating and near entrances.
So in this, there's bike racks right here next to, as you said, the seating area for building 2, as well as right here, which is right next to the pathway. So a cyclist, if on the path, could easily come over here, dismount, and then enter into and lock their bike up right here next to the seating area from building 3.
Okay, and then the entrance for building 3 is?
These are all storefronts right here.
Okay, so there's
All along
several,
here.
okay. So, question I have is building 1, the bike rack looks to be toward the back of the building, or I guess it's the side technically. And as a cyclist, I would be concerned about putting my bicycle near the exit of a building or near the back of a building, especially in that area, the slough. And so I'm wondering if the applicant, if they would consider moving the bike rack to the outdoor seating area.
Somewhere in this
Which is
location?
in that location, which is where the entrance to that building is, and which would be a lot more amenable to a cyclist to have their bikes near where you're going to, if you're going to sit outdoors, or near the entrance. So I'm wondering if that's possible.
You get the yes. Unfortunately, you got the no. I apologize. We could do that. The reason we put it where it is we were looking at how people would access, and we were trying to get people off their bikes, away from the pedestrians, and the bikes locked up. And if you look at the access, you'll see that if they're walking their bike through the center, which is what we would expect, they would cross on the crosswalk and then go directly to the bike racks. But
Oh, okay, I see.
But if
All right, so if they're
you're a
entering off the
local
path,
biker
okay,
and
okay.
you feel that that's the wrong spot, we have no issues with relocating. I just wanted you to understand our thought pattern as to why we put it there.
Okay,
Does it have to be there? Absolutely not.
okay. I just think as a cyclist, I would much rather have my bike near me, as near as possible.
I understand that. A valuable bike needs to be within sight. I understand. So we would definitely be flexible on location.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Let's see. Going back to the drive-through part, this is again for you. I'm sorry, your name is Mr. Kahn, you said? Karn, okay. You said the project needs the drive-throughs to function. What do you mean by function? What is that? I mean, can you explain your business model and what that means?
The business model is to develop a nice project and raise enough rents to be able to afford the project. And the drive-throughs are what drive part of the rent structure. And in order to make the project pencil at the end of the day and pay for itself, the drive-throughs are required.
Is that, I'm still unclear as to why. I mean, people don't park and go in? I mean, I don't understand.
They do, and that's why we have 143 parking spaces, but some people choose to drive through, and we need to be prepared for those people.
So you're saying that you're going to get enough drive-through customers to make it worth your while to have the drive-throughs, that's a requirement of your project, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that the tenants that pay the most rent are the tenants with the drive-throughs.
Okay,
that
okay, that
better?
clarifies. All right, okay, thank you for that clarification. That clarifies, thank you. Okay, that clarifies that question. I think I'm good for now, so.
But I did
go
have
ahead
a
and-
question on this slide right here. Justin, can you tell me on where the pedestrian paths are in front of the driveways? Those 4 black marks.
These here,
Are those signals for pedestrians to cross?
that would be the same concrete treatment as in the pedestrian paths that would cross the driveway so as to signalize, provide a visual cue to drivers that this is an area where pedestrians would cross.
And those are truncated domes in accordance with the ADA standard to
Yeah.
allow the people that need to know that they're entering into a drive aisle.
That's what these
Was
black
that
stripes are.
The black stripes, truncated domes in every case throughout the project when you see the black stripe.
So
The
there
black
aren't gonna
squares
be-
are seating areas.
So there aren't going to be walk stoplights for pedestrians or bicyclists at the driveways?
Presently, there's no walk stop lights. That's one of the things that there's street frontage improvements that would be needed, that would go before Caltrans for their approval.
Right.
And so it's unlike, say, a city facility in which we'd say you meet all current standards. This would be submitted to Caltrans for their review and approval. And since it's their facility, it's their discretion. I would expect that they would include walk activation for pedestrians.
Right.
And I would expect that's part of their standards
Well,
as well.
I would hope they would, because as part of this project, I mean, we're, the #1 city in California for vehicle versus pedestrian and bicycle incidents? And now we're talking about
For our
really,
size.
yeah, right?
for our size.
Now we're talking about increasing volume of traffic with drive-throughs and attracting more drivers into this facility. We need to do something to protect the pedestrians and the bicyclists who are going to use what is seemingly going to be an upgraded path for them as well.
So to piggyback on that, I was going to request that if you as an applicant could consider working with Caltrans to have a pedestrian signal button and a leading pedestrian phase over that driveway that crosses Auto Center Drive. Currently, there is not a pedestrian signal there, and I go, that's the way, when I walk downtown, I go that way, and right now, it's great, because there are no cars, but with the possibility of that being a busy shopping center, it's imperative that we have, and there are, if you want, I did my homework. I have a whole page, and Caltrans has, I can give you the, if you want it, the Section 2382, Chapter 8 of the Active Transportation Program. I have all that. So Caltrans is willing to work with people that are having developments off of highways to improve pedestrian and bicycle safety. So I know that that's something that they're doing.
We
And
will
it's in their
be
plan.
working-
It's in their vehicle, or not their vehicle code, their state and state highway code.
We will be working with Caltrans on that signal because we need to change the phasing of signal and do some things. So we will add that to the work list.
Can you explain that? Justin, can you show us on the, exactly how that's going to work on the map right there?
So at the intersection with Auto Center Drive in Maine, it's showing here a protected left turn and a through and right turn. So that's what was described in the traffic study of talking about restriping, as well as in the traffic study talking about changing the phasing. That was one of the comments by Caltrans, is that their expectation that this would be an 8-phase intersection. So that would allow for protected left and throughs in all 4 directions. And what you're speaking to is also including not only pedestrian activation for a pedestrian signal, but also have a leading phase crossing the intersections too, so that pedestrians could get into the section ahead of traffic and make it therefore easier for traffic to see them and hopefully not result in an accident.
Right, like on Green Valley and Loma Prieta, Pennsylvania, they have a leading pedestrian signal, and it's great.
Another example was right here in front of City Hall, here
Yeah,
at Main
that's true,
and
too.
Maple and Second. That's another example.
Yeah.
Of course, that's not a Caltrans facility.
We are at the mercy of Caltrans, but we will discuss it with them as part of it.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate that.
One other question, Commissioner Jones, 2,896 is the daily traffic off our proposed project, total.
So less than what was originally going in there.
That's accordance with the Caltrans ITE standards.
I haven't seen that number, so it just seems like it's going to create more traffic rather than less.
Did you find it, Steve?
Yeah, the number is actually on page 4-82 of the initial study document, second paragraph, and then it's backed up by the table that Justin has from the traffic impact assessment on page 22 of that document.
Oh, okay, so I just want to make sure I'm clear on this semantic point. This project would generate 2,986 new daily trips.
According to the makeup of the proposed project of restaurant and retail, and based off of the former historical uses of the site, the summary table shows that it would be a net decrease and again, this is based off of ITE trip generation manuals where you apply it, the number of square footage of the uses, what's the anticipated amount of traffic that would be generated. I understand your point that you would expect there would be a net increase. This was the methodology that was included in part of the traffic impact study to provide a comparison from historical to project-related traffic.
So, and I understand all that. This is saying almost 3,000, as I read this, additional.
No.
It says new daily trips.
No, the
New
historic.
daily trips compared to historic daily trips of 3,200. So we were at 3,200. That project's now gone. We now have a new project. Our new project total is 2,986. So both projects are in the 3,000 range. The previous project at 3,200, that number was driven high because there was a grocery store, which is a high traffic generator.
Right.
So
But I would
it
assume.
seems like a high number.
Yeah.
But when you look at the previous uses, the number that drove that high was the existing grocery store.
So how does, and this just may be way outside, but how does then, are you counting also, like if you're using a grocery store, which is a park and everybody walks in and not a drive-through, are you counting every vehicle that's going through a drive-through as a daily trip? Or is it only those that are parking and walking in that are being included in the study?
The ITE rates are for the generation. They don't really make a distinction between parking and using the drive-through. So that's the rate is kind of assumed that could be both, depending on the type of restaurant.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any electric vehicle charging stalls or accommodations in the project?
I can address this. So at this stage, there's no electric vehicle stall shown. There are, however, per the California Building Code requirements that there be some spaces made readily available for them to be installed. So that would be at the building permit stage when they do the site improvements. A few of the parking spaces would have to meet building code, which includes making them ready for electric charging stations.
Additional questions? Yes.
Yeah. So my comment, just looking at this and taking into account my personal experience with driving through that area and like going into the grocery outlet market, and here it's showing that traffic is both coming in and out of that first entrance and then again in and out at the signal light. And I'm just concerned that the gap between if someone came in through that first Main Street entrance and then cars are also going out on top of the signal light, the congestion of that small area of cars trying to get in with cars already driving down Main Street, it just seems like kind of a mess in that area. and knowing that, like, right across the street, there is a one-way entrance into the grocery outlet, and then one other side for you to either get out or make that turn into Auto Center Drive. And so I don't know if that was kind of thought of or seen as an example, because having an in and out on both sides just kind of, for that small area, seems a little bit hazardous to me, on top of the two pedestrians walking through both entryways. That was my only comment with seeing this.
Well, I'm not sure. I understand your concern. I'm not sure what else to highlight. Maybe we can let Bob address his ideas about the overall geometrics of the intersection and how it may or may not meet Caltrans requirements.
There's a couple of things to point out. First, the driveway locations are their existing driveway locations. We're not proposing to modify those. Secondly, the traffic study that was prepared and reviewed by Caltrans. That was Caltrans' purpose, was to review that to see if we were increasing traffic flow, creating traffic problems. And Caltrans agreed with the study that said that retiming the intersection and working some protected turning movements met their standards at Caltrans. And Caltrans has pretty high standards, so we feel confident that we have done a reasonable job with our traffic study. Caltrans has reviewed it. It's Caltrans right-of-way, not city right-of-way, and we do need 2 points of ingress and egress for the project. To try and run all those cars through one point would create the problem you're talking about.
Yeah.
So we feel it's been reviewed and addressed, and we feel comfortable.
Okay.
Any other questions from the commission?
Probably just a comment. I agree with Commissioner Rodriguez. That is a very congested area. It's almost impossible for people to get out of the side where the bank is at, and also the fish house, onto Auto Drive, and to be able to get across. It just seems like there needs to be, the whole area needs to be looked at, not just pieces of it at one time, but the whole area, and see what can be done to make that intersection work better and less dangerous for pedestrians.
At this point, I think I'll open it up to the public hearing. So any members of the public who would like to comment on this agenda item, please come forward to the podium, state your name and your address so that it's recorded in the minutes. And I would encourage those of you who would like to make a comment to come down to the podium and line up down there in the interest of keeping our meeting rolling along.
Good evening, Chair, members of the Planning Commission. My name's Rebecca Garcia, and I'm the Mayor Pro Tem of the City of Watsonville, and I represent District 5, and next Tuesday I become Mayor. I am so pleased with the redevelopment of this property because it will support the city's economic development, and we need to support the growth of businesses. However, in 2015, the city adopted a climate action plan. This plan outlines the impact of climate change in regards to heat waves, droughts, severe storms, flooding, and saltwater intrusion. It states that the largest contributor to climate change is carbon dioxide emissions. It further states that for Watsonville, the combustion of gasoline is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. Tonight, you're being asked to approve a special use permit to allow 2 drive-throughs in this construction. Drive-throughs mean idling cars. Idling cars mean more carbon dioxide. Remember, carbon dioxide contributes to climate change. In addition, these emissions are next to Ramsey Park, where children and adults enjoy recreation. The city already has numerous fast food drive-throughs and banks with drive-throughs. We do not need to add carbon to the city by adding 2 more drive-throughs. I recommend that you do not approve the special use permit. And contrary to what the developer says, I would expect that those businesses will still thrive and contribute to the economic development of Watsonville. In making decisions, we need to keep in mind the health of our residents. Adding carbon is not healthy. Please make the right decision to make Watsonville as healthy as it can be. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Gina Cole. I live at 756 Hill Avenue here in Watsonville. I echo what Ms. Garcia has said. I do recommend that you don't approve the special use permit from a couple of different reasons. I think the biggest one came from Mr. Karn himself, who said, this is where we need to have all those cars come in and out. And that, to me, says that this is a very car-centric development, not just with the drive-through, which has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 cars on the right-hand side, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 cars on the left-hand side, sitting and, as Rebecca said, idling. We are in the process of developing a more bicycle and pedestrian-friendly town, and to me, this does not fit with the plan. I know it's outside of the downtown area, and that we're encouraging more bicycle and more pedestrian access to the places that we live and work in our town. I'm concerned about the entrance for pedestrians. I'm concerned about the entrance as a cyclist. For me, as a cyclist, I don't ride on the sidewalks, and yes, that's a bike path, but I probably would not ride my bike on that path. I would ride my bike in one of those driveways where I feel like that's where, as a cyclist, that's where I should be. Again, I would also echo what Ms. Rodriguez said about this entrance on the left. To me, it is very reminiscent of by the Verizon building and the Big 5 building, where cars are coming out onto Main Street, trying to turn right, trying to go all the way across 2 lanes of fast-moving traffic to a turn lane to turn left onto Green Valley Road. At that intersection, that reminds me of what that might look like. And, you know, at 4:30 or 5 o'clock or 5:30 in the afternoon, that might really, really back up and be more idling cars. I'm encouraged that you are putting in pedestrian safety aspects on the path. But I will tell you that crossing Main Street right there as a pedestrian, that's a long way to go. And a lot of people only make it halfway. And if you've got someone that is elderly or someone that is, has a disability, they may not make it all the way across unless those lights really work with them as pedestrians. And those are the concerns I have. I think the biggest concern, though, is all those cars. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Good evening, Commission and members of the public. I'm Nancy Falstick. I live at 114 Lapis Drive, which is near Pinto Lake, right outside city limits. And I'm a single parent of an 11-year-old in this community, a former kindergarten and preschool teacher for many, many years of Watsonville children. And I'm currently the director of Regeneración Pajaro Valley Climate Action, which is your climate action organization fighting so that everyone can thrive in harmony with the natural world. And I'm speaking here this week as over 25,000 people have gathered in Spain for the COP25 with the United Nations. And the UN Secretary General has just issued a very dire warning that we may be approaching the point of no return in terms of maintaining a livable planet, a planet in which humans can inhabit. So I have to say I'm a little shocked that there's even consideration of more drive-through restaurants. I would like to urge this commission to oppose the special permit, to consider yourself to be a commission that is planning for life, not to bring more premature death to our community and the world. There is going to be a lot of loss of life in the very near future. People are already dying from climate change, and we have to change our society to one that is not car dependent. This project is extremely car dependent. You know, this is not a matter of choice, really. If we are to protect life, we have to change our way of being in vast ways in the very near future. So I urge you not to think about short-term profits, not to think about, you know, if you want to think about economic prosperity for Watsonville, we need to think about how to protect the agricultural community. We need to think about how to protect the health and well-being of our people. This is a very young population, and I, for one, would like to see them get to live long lives, and the way we're headed is exactly the opposite of that. You know, so scientists are saying we have perhaps till 2030 to have cut emissions drastically, and we are not on the way to doing that. So please be a commission that plans for a healthy future that does not bring about more premature death. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Hi, I'm Drew Rogers. I live in 42 Costanzo, and I'd have to agree with all three of these women on all of their terms. That cut my homework down here a lot. I really think that looking at this, I wanted to ask you, as Mr. Karn, I think, stated, that we have quite a bit of parking here. And I'm wondering if we could do some calming if we're proposing something like this, aside from the drive-throughs, which I'm fairly opposed to anyway. But let's just look at Building 2, Building 1, and Building 3. And in many of the cities I've lived in, Portland and San Francisco, what they're doing now is to calm traffic and also to create more of a meeting space. I mean, this is our Abbott Square in a certain way. You know, it could be. It could be. Santa Cruz, Abbott Square was nothing before except a place where the homeless used to hang out. And now it's a vibrant communal area. And I'm looking at this, and this also has potential for that. Not just to get your food, but to perhaps take a few of the parking spaces out near 1, 2, and 3 and create parklets. Maybe a little bit of grass, maybe some area where the kids can play. Something where people can feel more connected, not just with their food, but with each other and other people. And I think that this could use some modifying in that respect. I think there's more than ample parking, more than we're needed, and it is very parking enabled, let's say, car enabled. And that was the first concern of mine, was also the carbon monoxide of idling. Jenny Sarmiento, I think, brought it up about having already, I don't know, it was 4 or 5 drive-thrus here in town. I believe Santa Cruz has 1, maybe 2. And here, well, we're kicking ass as far as parking drive-thrus, I'll tell you that. But 2 more? I agree with all 3 ladies. Oh, one quick thing. As far as the bike racks are concerned, I'm assuming we're not going to have just what we have at the main plaza, which is one tiny little bike, but we'll have ample parking for the bikes as well. And as a cyclist, I would do pretty much what she talked about, because I don't want to compete with the cars getting to building 1, 2, or 3. And I'm hoping, as Mr. Carnes said, that in the pedestrian areas, that we cyclists can actually share that and not compete. In other words, those paths possibly being a bit wider to have an actual bike lane as well. I would think that would be an interesting consideration because we don't really want to compete with the cars. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Hello, I'm Mike Gonzalez, 505 Brewington, Watsonville. I just see one potential problem. I see several, but one that really shines to me. And although we don't really know what, probably what restaurants or what shops are going in at all these buildings as of yet, I'm concerned about building one, the drive-through aspect on that. The entrance to get to that drive-through is so close to the entrance from the road that depending on what type of a restaurant it is, and if it's a very popular one, I see the potential for traffic actually at peak hours, people coming home from work, things like that, possibly impinging on the traffic on Main Street. Those who really want to just sit in their cars and not get out and buy whatever fast food item that is being provided from that store, they could actually cause a traffic hazard going onto Main Street. I just see a concern about that. These are things that, we don't find out about until after everything's built. Just kind of like how it was talked about earlier, the entrances to grocery outlet, where, everybody just stops and blocks everything up trying to get in at that intersection. I just would like to know if there would be any mitigating factors that could be done to see if that problem doesn't happen. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Any other comments from the public? Okay, seeing none, I will bring it back to the commissioners.
Chair,
Yes.
as you consider a motion, staff recommendation, or whatever, I wanted to point out that, as it indicates in the staff report, that you are acting in your decision-making, your adjudicative capacity tonight. You're not legislating, you're not recommending a zoning change to the council. You're determining whether this particular project has satisfied the conditions that have been set forth by the council in the municipal code and the zoning code in the past. And I think staff has determined that it has met those standards. I'll let them confirm that. So if it turns out that the council, for example, went a different direction, different findings would have to be made, and the project would have to come back at a different time.
Is this project, if we were to approve this project, is it going before council for a final?
If it's appealed.
I believe in order for us to deliberate, we have to have a motion on the floor.
I'll make the first motion.
Okay, what would you like your motion to be? Are you moving staff recommendations as?
I want a motion so that we can then vote as a commission.
Unless anyone feel concerned, the fact that you support bringing a motion in front of you doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to vote yes or no on the motion for two reasons. One, you're getting it in front, and you may be persuaded one way or another in the deliberations. So it's okay to bring something forward as a motion or a second and vote against it later on. That's okay. So I just wanted to make that clear.
So is your motion that we're going to approve this or reject this?
Well, I'm against it, but I'm in a motion so that we can move forward as a commission. Because we need to make a motion in order to either vote yes or no, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so then I'm making the first motion.
So, okay, so you still do need to clarify, are you making a motion to approve staff recommendations as submitted here? Which means you don't have to.
Yes, yeah, so I will make a motion to approve staff recommendation.
Okay. That motion needs a second.
I'll second that.
Okay, now we can deliberate amongst ourselves.
I can start. From what we heard from the public and also the comments that we got in letters, it does, that people are interested in having bicycle and pedestrian-friendly development in town, and that this is a very car-centric development. So that's what I heard from the comments. I would tend to agree with that, and I understand that we are looking at the city plan the way it is, and that it allows for drive-throughs, and I understand that, but we also need to take into consideration what the public thinks and what and the future of our city and how that works. We've talked about the traffic movements in that area, and I live nearby. I walk there a lot. I can tell you, I've been almost wasn't here a couple times. It is dangerous. I am concerned. It is difficult to be a pedestrian or cyclist, and I would like to see more friendly developments for different modes of transportation. We have a lot of people in this town who their wheelchair is their vehicle, and in addition to bikes and pedestrians. So I really think that hearing what the public was saying in addition to what was being discussed here with the Planning Commission, this project seems to be very car-centric. So I'll just say that.
Well, I'll just say that I appreciate you bringing the project forward. One of the things I would also say is that this town doesn't really have a fast food problem or a caffeine problem. It's got a housing problem. And it's got a vehicle versus pedestrian and a vehicle versus bicyclist problem. And these are and it's got a CO2 problem. We all have that. So I would just say that I would like to see a project that incorporates those issues, that goes away to try to solve some of those issues while still meeting some of the economic issues that arise from a project like this and meet some of those economic goals. It's time to think outside the box a little bit.
Can I ask one more question of of Justin about housing. What other land is designated for housing on Main Street?
The stretch of Main Street from Freedom to the highway, or the freeway, is entirely designated for general commercial, and that's the kind of developments that you see up and down State Route 152. That changes as you go through the intersection of Freedom and Main and you head towards downtown Watsonville. At that point, you see its introduction of mixed uses, like we talked about before, the Hanson project at 445 Main Street. That's a 5-story building, 4 apartment stories over retail in the central commercial core area of downtown. The designations, the permitted uses, the allow intensities are different. This is a general commercial site versus a central commercial site. So for example, in the downtown area, you're allowed to go up to 75 feet. You're also allowed to have a floor area ratio of 2.75 to accommodate infill development at higher intensities and densities than elsewhere in Watsonville. In the general commercial areas, the floor area ratio is only allowed to be up to 0.45, which means if you had a single-story building, you could have only up to 45% of the site. If you had a 2-story building, you could have only up to 22.5% of the site covering that site. And then also having to meet the city's minimum parking requirements. That's part of the reason why you don't see a lot of high-density or high-intensity uses along our thoroughfare commercial or neighborhood commercial, commercial shopping center districts throughout Watsonville, because they allow the uses, they allow intensities, the parking requirements don't envision or allow that kind of development. To do so would involve changing the permitted uses and changing development standards to accommodate that infill, that vision for additional infill, which is also what we're looking to do as part of our downtown specific plan. We're looking to allow a lot more infill housing, a lot more commercial uses, a lot more activity downtown, which is what we're underway, which we're starting that effort a couple months ago.
And just for clarification on those points, Justin, so if a developer did come and say, in this particular location, we wanted to do a mixed use with some housing, that would require a special permit request?
Yes, if they wanted to do multifamily housing on this site, it's not permitted by right.
Right.
So unlike restaurants and retail, which are, they would have to get, for a apartment complex, they would have to get a use permit. That would be, per our zoning code, that could be approved administratively by the zoning administrator.
Thank you.
If I can just tag on to that, if you don't see things like the terrace apartments and mixed use along the Freedom Corridor and along this portion of Main Street because of that floor area ratio restriction in those zoning districts. So that type of mixed use would not be allowed under the current general plan designation of this property. So they could either do residential or they could do commercial, but a mixed-use project would be too dense for this area.
Under the current section of the general plan?
Under our current general plan.
And if I'm not mistaken, in the city charter, it claims that the planning commission, at the direction of the city council, can repeal sections of the general plan. Alan, is that correct?
No, I don't believe you have the authority to repeal the general plan.
At the direction of the city council?
Or the city, you can't do that. The city council
Can direct us to review that.
City council can direct you to review the general plan and come back with recommendations to the council.
The planning commission is charged with making recommendation to city council on any zoning modifications under Title 14 and then any general plan amendments. But city council is the final decision-making body.
Well, a final comment. If at this point we can't include housing, then I would recommend that we move forward with it, with the project, except for the drive-throughs. I think that it's definitely time for us to look at that and have City Council address that issue and make a decision on when and how they will decide to stop building drive-throughs in the city.
Are you making additional, or are you amending the motion, or is that just a comment? And I'm asking for clarification.
Right. It's just a comment.
Okay.
So I'll ask a question. So how does the information get back to City Council that we'd like them to review the sections of the general plan around zoning? Does that come as a recommendation from us or from their constituents?
Zoning or drive-throughs?
Zoning.
Okay.
There's a couple ways, mainly talking to your city council member. But the process of, let's say if you're talking about changing the floor area ratio limitation on commercial zones, that's a general plan amendment. That is something that in the future, when we are looking at our general plan update, we'll be looking at, because the city is going to be growing up and not out and expanding our boundaries anytime soon. But when we're looking at increasing density like that, it involves a significant amount of environmental review. It's not something that is a quick, like, oh, we don't, want drive-throughs anymore. Let's take out the drive-through ordinance. It's a much more involved process. If it was an easier process, we would have probably done it by now. Because obviously it is limiting development potential along our major thoroughfares today. But the road towards doing that is talking to your council members and having them work with the city manager to direct staff to make changes.
Is there any further deliberation or questions? Seeing none, I believe we can call for a vote on the motion.
The motion is to accept staff's recommendation, so I will do the roll call. Camer?
No.
Rodriguez?
No.
Sarmiento?
No.
Jones?
No.
Beach Olson?
No.
The motion failed.
Secretary, do we have a report?
I just want to follow up on that. This is appealable to the city council, just so that the applicant is aware of that. And the report of the secretary, I just want to say welcome back to Elena, who's been gone for, gosh, it seems like forever, but I believe it's since July. So it's great to have her back. I know at the last meeting I mentioned that cannabis would be coming this month, just based on having time to do outreach and make sure all our stakeholders are able to give input on the cannabis ordinance draft amendments that will be coming in January. Obviously not tonight. And I just hope everyone has a safe and happy holiday.
That concludes our meeting. We're adjourned. Thank you for attending.